Steve, that's the nicest introduction I think I ever had. Thank you so much. And let me tell you a little secret. I think I did manage, to get to be Chief Rabbi and various other Shmaiderais and Bukas and things. And of course, you only really worry about getting knighthood so you can give nachas to your mom. Shalom Sally, she passed away a year ago on the first night of Sukkot, but at least she was there for the knighthood of the peerage. And I'm not sure if she was terribly interested in the knighthood, but she got to meet the queen. And I have said more than once from the pulpit at Western Marble Arch that I don't mind any of these attainments when I go bis 120 or bis 120 and 3 months, as my Buddha used to say, and people used to say. Why the 3 months? She used to say, I don't want you should die suddenly. When I get to heaven, I will not say I was Chief Rabbi. I will not say I was in the House of Lords. I will say I give sweets to the children. That is the greatest zuchut I could ever aspire to, and I hope we will all aspire to make our children feel Ashrei Yisrael, that shuls are child-friendly places. And how lovely it was to meet some of your children on the way in. And friends, I'm sorry about the weather. I cannot believe that you actually came out to on a night like this. For that Messiah's Nefesh, I should probably stop talking immediately. Just enjoy being here, but weather is difficult. Last year, the whole volcanic cloud. I must tell you, the worst weather we ever had in Britain was in 1987, when we had a hurricane in the south of England that actually blew down half the trees in the south of England. In the middle of London, Hyde Park in Kensington Garden, half the trees were blown down and there's a bonfire. And that bonfire from the wood that was burned for 2 years.
Wow.
And one thing, Baruch Hashem, nobody noticed. But the night of this hurricane was the night after Shmini Atzeret. We had just done that morning for the first time, Mashiv Haruvah. And when I came into shul the next morning, the first guy in shul said, Rabbi, next time can you please pray? Friends, it's wonderful to be with you. And I was wondering what to say to you. I was just thinking about the cold weather, economically, politically, as well as meteorologically. What is a Jewish response to difficult times? And these are difficult times. I mean, we left England, I think, already when did we leave England? Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? I lose all sense of time. In the room next to us in the VIP lounge was an old friend of ours, John Major, who was Prime Minister after Margaret Thatcher. We were just talking, and we were just hoping we'd have Europe to come back to. I think Baruch Hashem the last few days they have managed to deal together. But what actually happens? What is the Jewish response to adversity? And one of the most profound ideas, I don't know whether it came from Ron Emanuel or somebody else, was that wonderful sentence, never waste a crisis. And that, to me, is a very Jewish idea. Let me explain. I'm Chief Rabbi of the Commonwealth, which means that when I began, that included Hong Kong. When Hong Kong went back to the Chinese, the community just asked us informally and unofficially to maintain that relationship. So we go there once a year. And always when I visit a country for the first time, I try and go under my jurisdiction. We try and meet the head of state. So when it went back to the Chinese, we went to meet the Beijing appointee governor of Hong Kong, Mr. Tung Chee-hwa. And Tung Chee-hwa turned out to be a great fan of Jews and Judaism, a great fan of Israel. He said a wonderful thing. He said, Chief Rabbi, your people and my people have been around for a long time. He said, my people have been around for 5,000 years. Yours have been around for 6,000 years. I wasn't quite sure about his arithmetic, but I didn't correct him. He said to me, what I want to know is what did you do for the first 1,000 years before you had kosher Chinese table? I said, Mr. Tung, you want to know what we did for the first 1,000 years? Complain about the food. But what interests me is how come the Chinese and the Jews survived and flourished for so long. And I rather suspect that it might be to do with the fact that the Chinese ideogram for crisis also means opportunity. If you have a word like that in your vocabulary, then you handle the crisis because you can see the opportunity within them. There is only one language I know that goes one better, and that is Ivrit. Because the Hebrew for crisis is mashber. And mashber originally meant a birthing stool. So for Jews, a crisis is always chevlei leida, birth pangs. A crisis is always the beginning of something new and something very beautiful. And I cannot think of any more profound way to respond to any kind of difficulty, individual or collective, than to see crisis as the prelude, as the birth pangs of something new. Jews confronted crisis the way Jacob wrestled with the angel. They said, Lo ashalechecha ki im berachta. I will not let you go until you've blessed me. I will not let crisis go until somehow I have extracted from that something positive, something of blessing. And that is, of course, what Yosef and Tzaddik said in the words that almost more or less bring Sefer Bereshit to a close. He turns to his brothers who sold him as a slave. And he says, Atem chashavtem alai ra'ah, you intended evil against me, v'elokim chashav l'tovah, but God turned it into something good. And all that pain that I suffered was so that I could be in a position to save your lives, la hayut amrav, and to save the great nation. And any people that can think about crisis that way is going to have not only incredible resilience, but a message to deliver to the world. And therefore I just want to share with you my reflections on the spiritual meaning of the current world financial crisis. And it went back, if you remember, to August 2008. And there was a very interesting event that took place. So, becoming American, actually, nobody noticed its deep spiritual significance, but it was deeply spiritually significant. There is an English sculptor called Damien Hirst. Have you ever come? Who does sort of stuffed animals and various other things. And anyone can persuade people to make money, give money for that. Must be an artistic genius. So he put for sale, 3 days before the financial crash of 2008, a sculpture at Sotheby's. It sold for £10.5 million. One of the highest prices ever received in auction for the work of a living artist. And what was it? It was a calf with golden hooves. And it was called the Golden Calf. And 3 days later, after somebody paying £10.5 million for the Golden Calf, the world markets collapsed. Now, I found that really rather divinely significant. Catastrophe happens when you turn wealth into a golden calf. When you start worshipping, and you no longer see what gold really is, which is a medium of exchange, but instead you begin to see it as a kind of God, possession of which makes you, in Tom Wolfe's famous phrase from the bonfire of the vanities, masters of the universe. Adam Ba'ul al-Mamona. The greatest expression of financial booms and busts ever was given by the sages. We become crazy. We do silly things for money. Adam Ba'ul al-Mamona. They said this in course in connection with love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your life, with all your wealth. The order seems ridiculous. If you love God with all your heart and all your life, doesn't it follow that you love Him with all your wealth? But the sages say there are people for whom wealth becomes more important than life itself. And that then becomes a kind of madness. In pursuit of wealth, people do crazy things. They're willing to risk their reputation. They're willing to risk their own and other people's money. They're willing to risk ruin at any level. For what? For another zero at the end of their statement of personal. But this is the birth pangs of us return to sane values. There is nothing wrong with the pursuit of wealth, so long as we realize it's a means and not an end, and so long as we retain a sense of proportion. I remember an occasion when a member of our congregation in Western Marble, sadly no longer alive, the late Sir Ernestine of blessed memory, bought, one day I came to Friday, one Erev Shabbos, I saw he bought Hilton's, the hotel group. He bought all the Hiltons outside of America. So I wished him, when I came into shul on Shabbos, Mazel Tov, it was the deal of the decade, and he turned to me and said, thank you, I've just got another headache, it's Shabbos less than Torah. And I thought, there is a man with a sense of proportion. There was another time, on Rosh Hashanah, we were doing Tashlich. I don't know if you realize in Anglo Jewry, which is kind of non-observant Orthodox, so in England we have this thing, and when I became the Roth of Western Marble Arch, they'd never heard of Tashlich before, and I had somehow to persuade them that this was worth doing. So I said, it's an ancient Jewish custom that on Rosh Hashanah we go to a river and you throw the rabbi in the river. Boy, did we get a large turnout. Anyway, one year a man came, a member of the shul, to do Tashlich, and I'd never seen him come to do Tashlich before. And I said to Elaine, I wonder what made him come this year. And the next day, I read the papers, and I saw that the previous day, he had just lost, and this is 20 years ago, he had just lost £200 million. 20 years ago, that was something. And the next time I saw him, I commiserated with him. And he gave me a smile and he said, well, look, it was paper money. When I had it, I never really had it, so when I lost it, I never really lost it. And I suddenly realized that he had come to touch symbolically to let it go. And I thought that was about a sense of value. And the result was that he wasn't thrown by the crisis, by his loss. And of course, he made it all back again, and he became resilient. And that is a fundamental point. Let me explain to you. When I became Chief Rabbi, they wanted me to go and have a medical examination. I assumed it was to test my sanity for him. But actually, it was just a physical checkup. And the doctor who was testing my health had me walk on a treadmill. And I asked him, what are you testing? Are you testing how long I can go, or how fast I can go? And he said, neither. So I said, what are you testing? And he said, I'm testing how long it takes you when you get off the treadmill for your pulse to return to normal. And that's when I realized that health is measured in recovery times. None of us can live a life in which, whether in business or career or other aspects of life, we are sure bad things won't happen. None of us is immune to the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Bad things happen. The real question is, what happens after bad things happen? And health is the power to recover. And the power to recover is a direct measure of our value system. If all that matters to us is wealth, then if we lose our wealth, we have lost everything. But if wealth is just a means to an end, then if we've lost wealth, we have not lost what really matters. And that is fundamental. That allows you to recover. So that is my first point. One thing this current crisis should do is teach us not to turn wealth into a golden calf. We earn it, we use it, but we should never worship. And the second point, to me, is crucial. And here it is. I thought Hashem was telling us something about this crisis by way of golden calf. So, I just reminded myself about the biblical narrative. And it's very interesting, it's fascinating actually. Just before and just after the golden calf, just before in Parshas Kisisa, and just after in Parshas Vayakhel, Moshe Rabbeinu gives a mitzvah to Bnei Israel. And it's the same mitzvah. Remember what mitzvah it is? Shabbat. And I wondered why, of all the mitzvahs, Shabbat was chosen by Moses as the tikkun, the antidote to the golden calf. And the answer, I think, is this. What leads to every financial crash, from the very earliest on the Dutch tulip craze, to the South Sea bubble, to the Florida real estate boom in 1929 and various others, there is one unmistakable sign, a siman, that people are going crazy, and this is an artificial boom that is one day going to crash. What is the siman? The answer is people start focusing, obsessing on the price of things rather than the value of things. So, for instance, I doubt it was the same here, I'm not sure if it was, but in Britain, what led to the crash was the price of housing. Was that something similar here? What happened in Britain was property was rising alarmingly. The result was people were taking larger and larger mortgages. They were investing in property because they saw that as a surefire investment, and they were focusing on the price of a house but not on the value. What is the value of a house? The value of a house is that it's a home. And what is a home? A place where you bring up a family. Now, while this boom was going on in house prices, the family in Britain was falling apart. I don't know if you know this, Britain has the highest percentage of teenage pregnancies, the highest percentage of single-parent families, and the highest percentage of children born outside marriage in the world. Do you know, in 2009, 46% of children in Britain were born outside marriage. And that is extraordinary. And of course everyone's in denial about that, because they said, what difference does marriage make? Marriage is just a piece of paper. Well, the average cohabitation in Britain without marriage lasts less than 2 years. And the end result is you have a whole generation of children growing up without a stable relationship with their biological father. And the result is tragedy. In 2007, February 2007, UNICEF, the United Nations Children Organization, did a survey of 26 advanced countries and came to the clear conclusion that Britain's children were the unhappiest in the world. Yeah. That report was ignored. On the 13th of September 2011, just a few weeks ago, UNICEF did a follow-up report, which was even more chilling. It said that Britain's parents are trying to buy their children's love by giving them expensive clothes and expensive electronic gadgets. And what do the children actually want? The one thing that costs nothing, the one thing their parents are not giving them, which is their time. And it is crazy. And the result was that there was almost this surreal disjunction between the price of a house and the value of a home. Why then is Shabbat a tikkun for that? Because Shabbat forces us to focus on things that have a value but no price. And that is what Shabbos is. In the poorest Jew, in the meanest steppe of Russia, on Shabbos, every Jew had a white tablecloth, a cup of wine, 2 candles, silver candlesticks, bread, and was a rich human being. Yudah Levi, the Kuzari says on Shabbos, the poorest Jew is freer than the greatest king. Shabbos allows us to renew the blessings of the family. Going to shul allows us to catch up on all the latest Lashon Hara. I mean, they used to say the art of conversation was dead. I always said, now the art of conversation is alive and well and exists during Kriyas Torah. On Shabbos you go to shul and you thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what you have instead of worrying about what you don't have. On Shabbos you realize what has value but not a price. Levi Yitzchak Berdichev once was standing looking at the people in the town square rushing here and there, and he went up to one person and he said, "Why are you rushing?" And the person said, "I'm rushing to make a living." And Levi Yitzchak Berdichev said, "What makes you so sure your living is in front of you that you have to run and catch it up? Maybe your living's behind you and you have to stand still for a while so that it can catch up with you." Shabbos is when we stand still and let our blessings catch up with us. And that is something special. That's something that doesn't have a price. Shabbos, when Shabbos happens, you can't work, you can't earn, you can't spend, you can't buy, and that is when you forget the price of things and focus on the value of things. Some years ago, just because I was so concerned about the general state of the family in Britain, I did a television documentary for the BBC about the state of the family. It wasn't a Jewish program, and it wasn't a religious program, but I was so concerned that I did a documentary. And one little moment of that film is absolutely fascinating. It's stayed with me ever since. I took Britain's leading child care expert, a lady called Penelope Leach, who isn't Jewish, and as far as I know has no Jewish connections. And I said, you know, come to a Jewish primary school. I just wanted to see what her reactions would be. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just thought it'd be interesting. So we took her to a Jewish primary school on a Friday morning when the kids were doing their Mog Shabbat. You know, the 5-year-old mum and dad closing the 5-year-old children and the 5-year-old woman and saying, none of this. This non-Jewish lady sitting there, absolutely fascinated, enthralled. And she wanted to work out what the kids were making of all of this. And she was saying to the kids, what do you like about Shabbos? What don't you like about Shabbos? And the kids said, what don't you like about Shabbos? The kids said, oh, we can't watch television, it's terrible. And she said, what do you like about Shabbos? This 5-year-old boy said, what I like about Shabbos is the only day that Daddy doesn't have to rush off. And as we were leaving the school, she turned to me and she said, Chief Rabbi, that Shabbos of yours is saving their parents' marriages. And I thought from a non-Jew that was an extraordinarily profound remark. There was another occasion when I got a very, very, very angry letter. That's actually what Chief Rabbis exist for, so that you've got somebody to write angry letters. And this was a really angry letter. This was a guy whose story was as follows. He said, Chief Rabbi, you're always talking about inclusion, wanting to bring people in, and here you are driving me away. What was the story? He came to our office of marriage registrations to register for a marriage. And our office told him, sadly, we couldn't register for marriage. Why? Because the young lady wanted to get married to a non-Orthodox, non-Halachic conversion. And this young man went ballistic. And I thought the only thing to do is pick up the phone to him. And I picked up the phone to him and I said, I understand exactly what you want. But look, you are about to get married. This should be the happiest day of your life. Don't turn it into World War III. I want you, please, to do the following. Number one, get married. The shul that converted your wife will host the wedding and have the most wonderful wedding. Then I want you to go and have the loveliest honeymoon you can possibly have. And then, when you come back, ask your wife, say to her, you've come so far. Would you like to do the one extra mile? And if she says yes, then I will register you for an Orthodox conversion and I will supervise it. And if she says no, then I wish you a life of blessing and happiness. They got married, they had the honeymoon, they came back. She decided she would like to go for an Orthodox conversion. And I thought, Baruch Hashem, you've settled that. 1 month later, I get a really angry phone call from the same guy. Here was what he said. You're wasted, you're lot. You want me to keep Shabbos. Me keep Shabbos, I'm Jewish. She needs to keep Shabbos. I said, look, do me a favor. You want to build a nice Jewish home, do me a favor, just keep Shabbos. So very begrudgingly he agreed, and Baruch Hashem, 1 year later, I officiated at the wedding, at the remarriage. It was a lovely moment. However, 1 month before the wedding, I get another phone. I mean, what is it this time? Chief Rabbi, I must come round and see. Well, I had to see him, and I was dreading the encounter, and in he watches with his wife. And he sits down, and he says, Chief Rabbi, I just wanted to say thank you for bringing Shabbos into my life. Until now, I have been a workaholic. I work 7 days a week. Now that I keep Shabbos, I have time for my wife. I have time to make friends. I have time to feel part of a community. And now I find that the work is done in 6 days after all. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing Shabbos into my life. Friends, that is Jewish values that stay. Always focus on the value of things, never on the price of things. Prices are determined by markets, but values are determined by ideals. Principle 3, give thanks. Modim anachnu love. It is an extraordinary fact. Just think about this. Even given the economic difficulties, by any economic index, we are affluent vastly beyond the expectations and the reality of people 2 to 3 generations ago. Whether you think in terms of real incomes, or life choices, or amenities, or life expectancy, we have choices in supermarkets today, everyone does, that the wealthiest king did not have 100 years ago. We can travel to destinations no one could have done. We have a range of entertainments and speed of communication unthinkable of 100 years ago. At this same period, in 2 generations, there has been a rise of between 300% and 1,000% in depression, stress-related syndromes, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, eating disorders, etc., especially among the young. How come people who have become more affluent have become less happy? And there is a simple explanation. The entire consumer economy is built on making us relentlessly aware of what we don't yet have. You have the iPhone, but you don't have the 4G, forget it. You have the iPad 1, you don't have the iPad. Steve Jobs comes down the mountain with the 2 tablets. I mean, watches. You have those watch advertisements in America. Watches used to be a device for telling the time. Then as a byproduct of John F. Kennedy's space program, they discovered the characteristics of crystal quartz, which allowed you to make watches that tell absolutely accurate time and are so cheap that they could be given away with cornflakes packets. And now what have they done? They've turned a watch into a mystical artifact. Have you noticed this? They confer some kind of charisma on anyone who wears it. I love this advertisement. You don't own a Patek Philippe. You only hold it in trust for future generations. He's a Shlomil. He actually buys a Patek Philippe to hold it in trust for future generations. Waits 50 years, gives it to his grandson, who says, "What a cheapskate, couldn't buy me this year's model." In England, there's a lady called Victoria Beckham. She was one, obviously she was part of the hot dog, she was part of the summit. She has just come out with a $30,000 handbag. I mean, sorry, you know the importance of being earnest? You know, Lady Bracknell, a handbag? I think you have to reassure me. But it's hurting children. I went a few years ago to a conference on child poverty, and believe you me, I am very concerned with child poverty. It's a real problem. In Britain, child poverty, despite the billions the government has poured into it, gets higher and higher. Why? Because of these one-parent families, child poverty. And what I was hearing from kids is, you don't understand what it's like. If you don't have the latest mobile phone, the latest Nike shoes, and this is not real poverty, it's entirely artificial, contrived poverty, and the real poverty is there in the mind. So a consumer society depends on making us unsatisfied with what we have. In short, the consumer-led economy, by forcing us to focus on what we don't have rather than what we do have, turned out to be the most efficient mechanism yet devised for the production and distribution of human happiness. And that is a crazy thing. The financial crash was caused in part by people spending money they didn't have to buy things they didn't need for the sake of a happiness that wouldn't last. And that is the economics that treats money as an end and people as a means. And that is a precise inversion of what should be our real values. So what is the answer? Giving thanks. There was a famous survey, it's called the Nuns Study. It's about a group of nuns in Minnesota, the Order of Notre Dame, or sorry, should I say Notre Dame? And this particular thing, this particular group of nuns famously offered all their records for medical research and some of their bodies as well. And it was very interesting because although these nuns were in their 70s or 80s, when they had entered the order and the order had retained these records, when they entered the order of about the age of 20, each of them wrote a short autobiographical account of who they were and why they were entering the order, and they were kept. So those records were then available to the medical researchers 60 years later when the survey actually began. And what they found, and it's fundamental research, is that the nuns who at the age of 20 expressed greater gratitude 60 years later, lived longer, were healthier, as well as happier. It really is a skula for Avichut Yamim to say thank you for what we have. It is Ben Zoma's axiom, Ezehu Ashir Hasomer B'chalka. Who is rich? One who rejoices in what he has. And that's why Chazal instituted every day for us to get up and make all the brachas of thanking God for giving us another day, thanking God for all the things that we otherwise would take for granted. And that really is the easiest way of transforming your life into a life of happiness. To think and then to thank. Happiness, as Koheles discovered, is not having all the expensive things in life. Happiness is celebrating what you have. You know, I learned the secret of what went wrong in Koheles's life very early on. In 1968, when as a 20-year-old student I came to America, and amongst other things I had two encounters that changed my life. I had a meeting with Rav Soloveitchik at Sal and a meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe at Sal. And as I was waiting to go into the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Hasidim were telling me a little story which I think is absolutely fascinating. You know, the Rebbe, before he became Rabbi, ran Kavod, which is Chavod's publishing house. So he was expert in the typographical symbols that proofreaders use. And he often used these to make a point with very economical. And they told me that somebody had written a letter to the Rebbe and saying, you know, I need the Rebbe's help. I am very depressed. I hardly have the will to go on living. I daven, but I am not inspired. I keep mitzvahs and I'm not uplifted. I need the Rebbe's advice. And the Rebbe wrote him an answer without using a single word. He just put a circle around the first word of every sentence. The word I. Happiness comes from the not I. There are two opposites in life, ill and well. One has an I, the other has a we. Happiness comes from the we, not from the I. And if you read Kohelet, the opening chapters, you will find it uses the word I more than any other text in Tanakh. Kanitili, banitili, asitili, asabtili. I did this for myself, I did this for myself. Non-stop, I. And I'm afraid we're repeating the mistake. What do we have nowadays? The iPod, the iPad, the iTunes, the iPhone, I. And happiness always comes when you forget the I and you focus on the we. That is the moment when we are filled with pleasure and we thank God for it. Or in that lovely, lovely rhyme of that lovely line from the poet W.H. Auden. W.H. Auden once wrote, "In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise." Just the act of praising and thanking generates happiness that cannot be bought in any other way. I want to tell you a story that to me was mind-blowing. It happened just a few years ago. There's a young man in our community, very from, and as it happens, very, very rich. And he was wrestling with a problem. What present should he buy his son for a bar mitzvah? And the answer he came up with was the finest answer I ever heard. And here is what he gave his son as a present for his bar mitzvah. He took his son for a week to a Romanian orphanage. And they lived there for a week. With all the orphans sleeping where they slept, eating what they ate. That was his present for his son's bar mitzvah. And when they came back, the son said, "Dad, when I'm older, do you think I'll be able to help them the way you do?" And that is how you bring your children up with a real sense of values and how you develop wealth, spawn. So, I could go on like this for a long time, but the truth is, I hope I've given you a little sense of how difficult times can make us focus on real values that bring us real and lasting happiness. And let me just end perhaps with a little story that I found very moving. There was a couple that you knew very well. I don't know if you're familiar with their names, but I think I'm going to name them. Elaine Morris and Vivian Wall. If you've ever walked around Jerusalem, you'll find their names on all the buildings, especially near the Kotel, or the Rose Garden around the Knesset, or the big, that big new conference center in Bar-Ilan. They gave away more money than almost anyone in their lifetime. They weren't blessed to have children, so what they did with their money is they made it and they gave it away. But what I found very moving, there was 30 years age difference between them. Morris was a lawyer and as a vacation job, he gave a job to the daughter of a friend at the princely sum in those days of £5 a week. And after the week, he was taking her for lunch, a young girl at the time, and they passed somebody, was derelict in the streets. And Morris, this is back in the 1950s, gave the guy, whatever it was, 10 shillings, whatever it was, a reasonably generous donation. And then they walked on. And she said, "Mr. Wall, would you mind, please, towards the end of the week, you're going to give me £5. Do you mind giving it to me now?" And he gave her the sum, and she went right back and gave it to the derelict. And he said, "Why did you do that?" She said, "Well, the money you gave him is not going to change him." And they had their lunch, and the next day came for him to give her a salary. And he said, well, I'm not going to give you your salary because I'm not going to take away that mitzvah from you. But he asked her to marry him because he said her heart was bigger than mine. Now, this was a couple that gave away hundreds of millions of pounds. But what struck me so much when Vivian died on Islam at the age of 59 was that among the people who were most deeply in mourning were the waiters and the cleaners at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. You see, they didn't want to waste money having a home in Jerusalem, so they stayed in the King David Hotel, and whenever they stayed, Vivian got to know the waiters, the cleaners, what kind of family circumstances they had, who were their children, did they need anything, was somebody ill. She knew all the names of all their families, and whenever they needed help, quietly she gave that help. And I thought to myself, that is what we mean when we say every Motzei Shabbat, Kol Makom She'ata Motzei Gedulatho, Sham Ata Motzei Anvata Ento. Where you find greatness, there you find humility. There were other people who gave hundreds of millions of pounds, but very few who at the same time cared about people that other people didn't even make eye contact with. That is greatness. Friends, the truth is that was a famous guy who was a friend of Queen Victoria, an eminent Jew, a very wealthy man. He had made a very good career move. He married a Rothschild. He was able to retire at the age of 40 and devote the rest of his life. He lived to be 101, and in the 19th century 101 was worth something. And he did many good works. And it is said of him, somebody asked him once, Sir Moses, what are you worth? And he named a certain sum, and the man said, Sir Moses, I know you've got 10 times that amount. And Moses Montefiore gave the following reply. He said, you didn't ask how much I am, you asked how much I'm worth. I gave you, therefore, the amount I've given to Tzedakah thus far this year, because we are worth what we are willing to share with others. And what I find so remarkable is that Hashem taught us this lesson through the very geography of Eretz Yisrael. Did you ever notice the following curious fact? There are two seas in Israel. There is the Galilee, the Kinneret, and there is Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea. One is full of life, the other one, nothing can live in it. And yet they are fed by the same water. They're both part of the Jordan system. So how come one is full of life and the other is dead? And the answer is very simple. The Sea of Galilee receives water at one end and gives out water at the other. The Dead Sea only receives water and doesn't give. If you receive and you don't give, that's not life. Friends, I hope some of these principles will help us reorient our lives so that we live for the things that matter, which are not the things we are told that matter. True happiness is born in hard times, because hard times force us to focus on the value of things, not the price of things, to celebrate what we have instead of polishing after what we do not yet have, and allows us to focus on what we can give to others, not what others give to us. May we learn and rehearse and rededicate ourselves to those values, and then we will know, we will find the happiness that lasts. Thank you very much.